Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am joined today by Kalvin Garrah.
Hello, everybody. It's
Cal-
Garrah. It's actually Garrah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Well, Kalvin, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah. How do I even do an introduction for
Yeah,
this?
I know. That's typically the question I like to ask for everybody.
Ex-YouTuber, grad student. Some people. So yeah, I used to make YouTube videos for a long time. Definitely some controversy with those. And Riley and I have known each other for probably like I would say like 4 years now. Probably 2020.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Time flies.
It has flown. But yeah, back when I was making content, it was primarily kind of, I guess, more edgy, like reaction content. I'm transgender myself, so I'd react to a lot of discourse in the trans community. And yeah, that was kind of what I was doing. And now I'm a graduate student. I do research in a couple areas, so we'll probably get more into that, but that's, yeah.
Yeah. And then for the audience's perspective, again, because like I know that there are going to be some people who are watching who might have a certain reaction, negative or otherwise, to me doing this interview. But I think that fundamentally Kalvin is a good person. I've had a good opportunity as a friend of his to be able to judge his character, and I think that there's a really good story here. So if you have some sort of feelings, I would just ask you to suspend whatever you may believe and at least, listen to the rest of this conversation. So thank you. I understand the perspectives people may be coming from, but I think that there could be something really worthwhile to be said here.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too. Like when you initially had asked me if I wanted to do an interview, my first concern was like, I don't want you interviewing me to look poorly on you because you like have just so many big things going on and great opportunities. So I also would say the same thing. Like Riley knowing me and like wanting to talk to me and stuff, even on camera, is like, should never look poorly on her. It's just, my actions in the past don't define the people around me, and I think that's important.
I appreciate that. But, like like one thing I've seen as a kind of a tragedy in the online political space or in the online social media space for as long as I've been involved in it is I've seen a lot of people abandon their friends over
I've been abandoned by my friends.
Yeah, and I just don't have that in me. So I mean, like people can hate me or whatever, but I do have good reasons for doing what I do. At least I believe so. And I mean, I consider you a friend, and I'm not gonna abandon you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it shows like I've had friends that even like I feel have done things that I even look at as like really controversial. And it's just like you were saying earlier, like we were at lunch earlier, and she's like, you have to look at the totality of the person. Like, how are my interactions with you, not just online, but like in general, like in your day-to-day life? Like, how do you treat the people around you? How do you interact with strangers? Like, these types of things. And like, I think it speaks volumes about somebody if they make maybe controversial things online in a space like that is kind of known to be breeding grounds for controversy.
Sure.
And then in real life are just really an outstanding person, or at least a good person by society's moral standards. So
yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. And obviously now, for people who are watching who aren't aware of Kalvin's background, you might be like a little bit like,
what did this guy say?
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to get into that. We'll provide like background so that if you are watching, you don't have that context and you can be able to get up to speed. But I guess I'd like to start even a little bit before that when you were starting on YouTube. So could you talk about when you started on YouTube, why you started creating content, and kind of like the early content that you made before you got a lot bigger online?
Yeah, so it actually all really started on the app Musical.ly before.
Really?
Did you not know that?
I did not know that.
So before TikTok, okay, well, I can even zoom a little back before that. Like before I had ever even transitioned, I loved making videos. And those were like gaming videos. I made like just random videos with my friend Noah or my other friends. And, I was making YouTube videos like from the time I was 14. And they just didn't really ever have any track. But it was for fun. I loved just video making. And I ended up getting on Musical.ly because there was actually like and this was right after I came out as trans. Because there was a big LGBT community on there. And I actually became good friends with this guy named Reagan. He lived in my county, and he was pretty popular online
Okay.
on Musically. So me and him became best friends. And as a result, I started posting more on Musically. And then he dated this other guy, another trans guy named Justin. They kind of together blew up, like in like a ship way. Like people loved them together.
Okay.
And I, as a result, kind of blew up too on Musically because I was Reagan's best friend.
Okay.
And then there was like a huge community, and that's why I met my friend Ryan. He kind of was part of that kind of group too on there. And we had like hundreds of thousands of followers on there, and I at the time was still making YouTube videos, so I used that platform to kind of build my YouTube. And I wasn't making any controversial content though. I was like, it wasn't 100, it was like 100,000, under that, like actually maybe on.
I mean, it's still a lot of people.
Yeah, well, the thing, I don't want to make it seem like my YouTube following came from there, because what happened is it kind of got some people from there, and then when I was 18 or 17, so I was 17, I made my first like super viral YouTube video because I had started making these like transition timeline videos. Those are the videos that helped me when I was transitioning, like my, first month on T, second month on T, like, advice on this, that, and the other. Non-controversial stuff. Then I had seen this video of this person talking about gender dysphoria. I really disagreed with it. I didn't like it. I felt very weird watching it. I felt like it was kind of a bastardization of a lot of like elements of gender dysphoria. So I reacted to it. And that video blew up. And that was when I was 17, my first viral video. And coincidentally, the video that really got me canceled in the end.
That was the video.
That was the one with Brennan.
Oh, interesting. Do you still have a link to that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Can we like watch it? Or
we could watch it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's unlisted.
Here, could you like send it to me? Or?
I did. Yeah, I sent you a bunch of links
to
unlisted.
Oh, so, my phone is actually out of power. So
I have it on mine.
Do you have it on your phone? Yeah. Let's go ahead and watch it real quick.
So it's kind of I mean.
We don't have to watch all of it. You can pull up like what you think are the relevant points. Because again, like I want to make sure for the audience's perspective that they have kind of the same context as like the people at that time did.
Yeah, so I haven't watched this video in a while.
Okay.
But.
And then later I'll like edit it so that you, as the audience, can see what we're seeing like in this space-ish here.
Yeah, and let me just give the precursor. Like it is a. You'll get this tune throughout like most of my videos, right? Where I was being very edgy. And my approach was, what's the word for it? My approach was not kind-hearted. And so I think that this kind of video kind of exemplifies that, where I was making points that I think would have been taken better if it wasn't at an individual and if it wasn't so mean-spirited.
Okay.
All right.
I can count maybe 15 girls in my school that all look like that, and Willow is the first one I think of. I'll tell you guys though that
Sorry, my phone's kind of broken, so I have to like go like this.
You're all good. I think.
Say hello. As you guys can probably tell, Bella really wanted to be in today's video, so she's a star now. Hey guys, Kalvin here, welcome back to my channel, where today I'm going to be doing something so requested. Everybody loves my reaction videos, whether they're to old videos of my own.
Yeah, usually I'd react to older videos myself and stuff.
To stupid SJWs on the internet,
or
even to
it would
cute
be
dogs
like
mine.
I'm trying to think, what did I react to before this? I think it would be to like, maybe it would be to like people that were like cringe SJWs, but it wasn't really about trans stuff.
So what would you say it was about?
I don't know.
I mean, like,
we can look. Let's see.
Yeah, because I'm gonna be totally honest. Like, if I hear someone being like, "Yeah, those cringe SJWs," that's sending off red flags in my
huge
in my
red
mind.
flags.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was pretty normal because this is like Leafy is here era. You know. Wait, let's just see because I
wasn't as active online. So could you explain what that means for people who are watching?
Leafy is here?
Yeah.
He was this like really famous like reaction content guy.
Okay.
He would react to like everybody. I mean, he was roasting everybody. It was insane.
And what do you say he would do? Like, would he make references to like SJWs online?
Yeah, definitely. And Hunter Avalone too was really big at the time.
And I don't know, like, I know that he used to make conservative content. It's not
Yes.
like I watched his content, so I don't know if he said like similar sort of
I would watch
things.
his content at the time.
Okay.
But I didn't always agree because I've never been a conservative.
Hmm.
But this is interesting because, like, I guess I had, like, one video before that, like, about hate comments.
What was it called?
Reacting to cringy SJW hate comments.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that the thing that people are going to care about is like the cringy SJW part, you know?
Yes.
Like that is the more, to my ear, more relevant part, because like, it's interesting that you say that you were never a conservative. I mean, based on what I know about you personally, I believe that. But if you're making content where it's like you're criticizing SJWs, I think it's reasonable to understand based on, to spoil it for the later of the for later in the conversation. That you got more involved with some more conservative content creators. I think that would explain how that happened.
Yeah. I think there was one time I called myself like a centrist without knowing what that meant.
Sure.
Because like I had like, I guess when I was so young, I wasn't really thinking about like what, like the totality of my political beliefs. I wasn't thinking about the fact that like, oh, just because you take a more, unpopular or more or less, open approach to like all these random gender stuff, like whatever, it doesn't mean that like you aren't like pro social like human rights, like pro like everything,
Yeah, like
everything,
pro, like generally like civil rights
abortion and all that, like pro like anti-prisons, like these are all things I was always in favor of. So yeah, but
I feel like that probably got lost given
what I was so focused on.
Yeah.
Which I wish it hadn't, because now I'm like so into that.
But I go back to could you pull up what video are you pulling up right now?
Well, this is just the first one that went viral.
Okay, so let's keep watching a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think
all right.
the other one, reacting to hate comments, it wasn't as it didn't really ever have any. I don't know why people are like, oh, we love these videos, because.
But you said this was the one that got you kind of infamous, right?
Yes.
All right, let's watch this a little bit more.
But I was really feeling in the mood to make a reaction video, and I didn't know what to do it on until today when I found the perfect video. Just imagine the scene. I'm chilling at school, doing nothing, as usual. And I'm on YouTube as I am, and I'm looking through my feed, and I find a video. It was just some cringy SJW talking about how she's trans, and so I decided that looks like a great video for me to react to, because if you guys...
So, Brennan, I don't know what gender or like what pronouns they've always gone by at
They
the
go
time.
by he now.
They go by he now.
Him, yes.
At the time, did you know what they preferred to go by?
So it gets to that.
Okay.
Because if you guys don't know, I'm a trans guy. I'm 17. I've been on hormones for over a year now, getting top surgery in 25 days. 25
I was being exposed as a child transitioner.
days, yo. That's nothing. Vlog soon. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to get you guys straight into this video. We're going to go over to my computer, and we're going to watch this video by, I think her name is Brennan. Let's get straight into it. So guys, as you can
It
tell,
makes me
I
physically cringe saying that now.
inside of my computer, but we're gonna start reacting to this crazy fucking Transtrender. I wanted to first read, the description of Brennan's channel so we could get a feel for
Can you
who
pause real quick?
she is, or
Sorry, I'll be interrupting. So you said
good.
Transtrender. So at the time, what was that word understood to mean?
So it's weird because I feel sometimes that my understanding of the word was a little bit different than like what people thought I was trying to say. Because I never felt that people were intentionally pretending to be trans.
You never felt that people were intentionally pretending to be trans?
I always felt, and maybe I can articulate this better now because I've thought more about it.
Well, explain like what you meant at the time, and then.
Well,
like,
it's what I meant at the time, but I
Okay.
didn't articulate it. I don't know. Maybe maybe I did, but people just didn't like care.
Okay, so what were you trying to say then?
So people thought that I was saying that people were pretending to be trans. I think at the time, my point was that like, no, these are people who genuinely believe that they're trans and like fully identify with that, but not because of like an innate reason. It's
When you say an innate reason, what do you mean by that?
that being trans became trendy in certain LGBT online spaces.
And that people
Were non-consciously kind of started to believe they were trans for whatever reason, and then
like for reasons other than some kind of innate feeling.
equality.
Okay, so like I can, and again, this doesn't necessarily like mean that I'm agreeing with the criticism, but like my position, at least personally, today, right now, 2025, year of our Lord,
Right.
is that being LGBT, that being transgender is something that's innate, something that you are either born with or it's epigenetic, something that might be like influenced by societal and biological factors, but that there's at least some influence of biology, that there's some degree to which no matter what someone does, that there is nothing that they could do to make them not be trans or not be LGBT if they are.
Yes.
And so, and there's a lot of different evidence you could look at to support that. I'm not saying that there's like a pink brain, blue brain sort of thing, but like, you know, there's,
and there's
I think one of the best things I would suggest for a layperson, there was a Netflix documentary, I can't remember the name of it, so I'll edit it into the video later, where it was about the issues with, it documented the history of conversion therapy and how actually there was a long history where people who were themselves LGBT really tried as much as they could. Like they were sometimes the people who were like running these organizations, the conversion therapy organizations, because they wanted to believe as much as they could that they could make themselves not be gay, because it would be either like a big impediment on their relationship with their family or their loved ones, or if they had kids with their kids. Like being LGBT for the longest time was like a really negative thing.
And it's in the DSM and stuff too, you know?
Yeah, and there's like those elements as well. But I'm saying that like, you know, the reason I recommend the documentary for people for this reason is that like basically the conclusion of the documentary is that all these people who who were themselves LGBT and themselves, some of them transgender, who tried as hard as they could to not be LGBT, to not be trans, at the end they couldn't, because it's innate.
That's why conversion therapy there's no evidence for its
and that's
efficacy.
why most major medical organizations, I believe that there's a statement with a lot of the major medical organizations signing off on it that says that they believe that conversion therapy is just harmful. It doesn't actually help people.
Yeah.
For that reason, because we've tried it and it does not work.
Yeah, and I think at the time I noticed so you're going to hear a lot of what's said in this video, and it was just ticking off these red flags for me where I'm like, if this is your video where you're trying to talk about gender dysphoria, I don't really feel like this gets at that. I don't really feel like this gets at, and maybe it was very narcissistic in a way of me to say, well, you're not, I have gender dysphoria, and this isn't how I feel. Because gender dysphoria can come up in a lot of ways. It's a diagnosis in the DSM, but it's also like a symptom, and there's just a lot to it. But my real problem with this was, I guess I felt that being trans was kind of this, this is like the essence of the trans medicalist argument, is like, it's similar to like with like self-harm communities, where like people get really into these communities, and I get really tied to the identity. That's part of it. Well, for self-harm, it's negative, because it's like my participation in this community is contingent upon me self-harming. So even if it's like a community of getting better, if all my friends are in it, if I leave,
So what would you say is the relationship between like communities of people who would like self-harm and what you would identify in like the trans medicalist community?
Yeah, so this was not the trans medicalist, but at the time, I felt that these people were really tied to trans spaces and LGBT spaces. And then they like got really tied to the identity within it. And then, so then because it's not a bad thing to be trans, and it's not a harmful thing to be trans, unless... Obviously, if you have dysphoria untreated, it can be very bad, but, you know, then they get tied to the identity, wrapped up in the identity, and they just, like, build a community around that.
So you're saying, if I can kind of...
I'm not saying I agree with this now.
Sure.
I'm saying that at the time, I felt like there was some sort of socio-cognitive process that was going on.
So if I could, like, restate the argument as I understand what you're saying to be. Again, not saying that I agree with it, but basically that the allegation is that because there were at the time beginning to be a lot of online spaces where being trans or being LGBT in general was regarded not as a negative quality as it's been historically, but actually as a positive quality, and something
in those spaces.
In those spaces, and notably, it would be something that you would almost have to be able to identify with in order to be able to get access to those communities. And so you're saying that there might have been some amount of people who were concerned that there were, let's say primarily younger people, who wanted to be a part of those spaces, who may have not necessarily had these same kind of innate feelings that we would typically see among LGBT people, but who would want to be a part of those communities, who would identify with the labels of gender or sexuality or what have you, so that they could be able to participate in those spaces.
Yes.
Okay. Again, I'm not sure if I don't know. That, here's what I'll say. Here's my first thought about that, because like it reminds me of there was someone who tried pushing like the rapid.
Oh,
onset
Lisa
gender.
Littman?
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Isn't that sounds very similar to basically what she would talk about, and so that's why I'm very careful to approach.
She would miss a. So I've read all of her articles.
Okay.
I've studied the methodology of all of her articles.
Okay.
They're poor. But this ROGD thing, yes, you can read all about it online. It's a poor theory. It has no, because when they did this experiment, it was a correlational study, but they interviewed parents of kids who actually had gender dysphoria, but they actually sourced the parents, the sample from TERF sites, from like Fourth Wave
God.
Today.
I think I remember reading about that.
It's a mess. But the thing is, I think that TERFs do this thing, because she's a TERF. It's a leap in logic, where you go from, there's this huge increase in people assigned female birth, at least in England, where they're actually really keeping track of it. There's this like really insane increase in people who are coming into gender clinics reporting looking for gender services. So that includes therapy.
Okay.
And you go from like the MTF and FTM kind of lines looking like this. You hit 2010, it spikes. I can send you the source for this.
Okay.
And that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting, why is that happening? Their argument was that like a bunch of girls are being like seduced into being trans by the... It's a really, really, really poor theory for probably a really complex phenomenon. I never really subscribed to ROGD. Like, one of the very last videos I ever made on YouTube was reading Abigail Schreer's book about ROGD and just ripping it apart. But that's what always fascinated me, is like, why are we just this uptick? It's weird. Like, why are...
My understanding is that basically there's been an uptick in people identifying as transgender because of wider acknowledgement of the existence of trans people and the fact that that's possible.
But if that was the case, right? Okay. Why is it only people assigned female at birth you're having this, like, it's disproportionate?
I think that part of that, I think I have thought about this before. And again, like, this is... what I'm going to say is more in the realm of speculation.
Right.
I think it is easier
to transition.
I think it's easier, socially speaking, for trans men to be able to come out and transition than trans women, because think about like what you're going to look like early on in transition. If you're an early transition trans man, then that might mean, if you change how you dress or you change how you cut your hair or whatever, then you still might not be regarded as, you might not be super socially stigmatized when you go out and interact in the public.
Right.
But if you're a trans woman and you are thinking about coming out, it is a lot harder for you early on. Like, if you want to come out and you want to present more femininely, like if you are perceived by default as more masculine and you're early on in transition, then there is a much, much higher risk, I think. Again, this is just me talking personally. I can't think of a specific kind of data point I'm quoting at the top of my head, but like, I had to deal with this early on when I transitioned, because I transitioned mainly in the South. Yeah. And I was interacting with a lot of people, and I had to constantly think in the back of my head, like, fuck, if I dress wrong, or if yeah, of course you can. It's my channel. Like, yeah, fucking course. But I had to constantly think, like, if I dress like too feminine compared to like where I'm at with my body medically transitioning and I interact with the wrong person, then like I could get seriously hurt. Yeah, like there's a real danger. And even just coming out initially as a transgender woman, because like as a man, or like growing up raised as a man, you might have a lot of like ingrained toxic masculinity, where it's like you might have some beliefs that like, oh, like I might feel like a woman, but that makes me weak, and that's going to make me, seen as lesser by the people around me and the people I care about. So I feel like, for like those and similar reasons, I feel like there's a lot more pressure against trans women to come out and transition, but I feel like it probably is a little bit easier socially.
So why do you think the uptick starts like that at that time?
I think that if that stigma didn't exist against men or people perceived as men presenting more femininely in society, I think you would have seen an equal uptick in both. I think that's something that's keeping them back from having the same degree of.
So you
coming
think
out.
that support started in like 2010?
I think that you start seeing a lot more people coming out as trans around that time. I know I've heard some arguments that like
Okay.
what was it? I think I've heard that like 2015 was like the trans tipping point year
Yeah.
where there was like a massive amount of like the most amount of transgender representation in the public eye that there had ever been before up until that point in like popular culture. And I think that you can definitely start seeing that a couple of years prior around 2010.
And I think I agree with you now. Like that would be my argument for it now.
But I mean, like, so that all that context, that like, you know, I've thought about this.
Yeah.
But, like, I think it is very.
Riley pulled me out of trans medicalism. I'll give you that shout out.
We'll get. I appreciate that, but it would have only been for a couple of minutes because the screen only went black a little bit ago.
Sorry guys, you can see us for a couple minutes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We're getting into a heated moment about trans medicalism.
Yeah, very
discourse.
heated. Yeah, very heated moment.
Never thought I'd be back here.
Let's go back to reacting. So like that's context just for the transgender, trans medicalism. Now we can keep going.
Who she is. I don't really give a shit about your videos. Start reacting to this crazy fucking Transtrender. I wanted to first read, you know, the description of Brennan's channel so we could get a feel for who she is, or I mean, who she is. I don't really give a shit about your videos that you make, but it turns out that
Yeah, so one thing that bothered me at the time, I wish I could zoom in, oh I can't, is that like this person writes on here like, AM airs pronouns, but you know it doesn't really matter. And it was wrong of me to not roll with they, them.
Yeah. This is like a hard. All right, so.
But it bothered me that you would say your pronouns didn't matter. That was something that bothered me at the time.
Yeah. So, this is a hard thing for me. And I mean, like, for context for people who are watching, in case you aren't aware, it's like I do a lot. Like, I've done a lot of professional work doing advocacy for the trans community and for the LGBT community. I was on the board of directors for Free State Justice, the largest LGBT organization in the state of Maryland. You can see pictures behind me. Like I was one of the main people who led passing passed the Trans Health Equity Act, which was it brought Maryland's Medicaid coverage in line with the modern medical standards for gender affirmative care, which made Maryland one of the best states to receive gender affirmative care. I also was on Governor Westmore's transition team, and I recommended not only signing this bill, but signing an executive order to make Maryland a safe haven for people to come and receive gender affirmative care, which the governor then signed later that year. So it's like I have a lot of experience representing the community. And an area where, I admittedly have some issue is with a lot of like this kind of neopronoun stuff where because like fundamentally I have a belief that gender is related to an intrinsic and an immutable quality.
Right.
Basically, because of that, I believe that it does have something to do with biological sex.
And it's important, I feel, to say that framework, non-binary people fit into that framework.
Yes. Something that I always, like, what I had an issue with as far as transmedicalism back when I used to do reaction content on YouTube was that, like, for me, the main issue with transmedicalism is that it was exclusionary to non-binary people, which I don't think is the case. I do think that there's good evidence to see biological sex not as a binary, but as a bimodal distribution or as a spectrum, whatever you want to say.
But what's weird is that, and you'll notice in this video, it's not this video alone, but a lot of my videos, it was strange because I did question a lot of these people that had fringe identities or neopronouns.
Sure, but I think, like, I guess my point is that I see that struggle.
But I was pro non-binary.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You were pro non-binary at the time.
I felt that non-binary people fit into transmedicalism ideas because I felt that there are not, because really transmedicalism, if you had to put it in one sentence, it's the belief that you need dysphoria to be trans. I felt that there were non-binary people with dysphoria and non-binary people who transition.
Okay.
Even if it's only part of the way or whatever. It was just people that seemed to have no dysphoria were more likely to take on non-binary identities.
Sure. No, and I mean, like, so what I'll say about that is that
At the time.
Yeah, what I'll say is I'm fairly confident. I can't speak for other people because obviously everyone's going to have their own recollection. My understanding is that most people, if you were to ask them at the time what your view on non-binary people was, they would probably say that you had a negative opinion.
That I hate non-binary people, yeah. And I hated that.
So why do you think that came through that way?
Well, because I was reacting to a lot of people who were non-binary.
Gotcha.
A lot of people who used, identities that were under that umbrella. It wasn't often binary trans people saying these things that I felt were like kind of outrageous.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, like, and I can understand that miscommunication insofar as, like, you're mainly reacting to people who happen to be non-binary, but it seems like the main reason, based off of what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I want to make sure I'm representing this correctly to the audience, is that the main issues is either how they describe their relationship with dysphoria or their relationship with gender in general, or using things like neopronouns, which don't seem to have any kind of relationship with your experience of gender.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And I told you, it was kind of narcissistic in that way as well, to like assume that this experience of dysphoria, like, I knew it was complex and really, and it's hard for me to even look back because I've thought so much about this post YouTube, but I do believe that at the time I had some idea of the way that like individual differences probably contribute to like the experience of dysphoria.
Yeah.
Some people are generally just dispositionally better at coping. And that was something that I think that was more something I later on thought harder about. But like at the time, I had friends that were FTM and they didn't want to get bottom surgery because they were okay with, not having it.
Okay.
And I never had a problem with them. I never viewed them any differently than me.
Yeah. I think that this gets at a really, like, honestly, one of the biggest issues I see within our community, which is the fundamental question of, if you have someone who says that they are LGBT and you believe that they aren't, is there ever an instance where that could be true?
Right. And that's hard. That's hard because...
Well, I think that there are, like...
Who am I to say who you are?
Exactly. And I mean, like, so first let me premise this with, this is an incredibly difficult thing within the community, and it's something that I think we should approach as we're talking about it very carefully.
Yes.
Because I cannot begin to count how many people who have done that sort of thing and have been labeled and seen, and pretty arguably justifiably, as very bad people.
Yeah.
Like, think about like the LGB Alliance sort of people,
Yeah.
where you have like people who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, and they just straight up say, no, we don't want to associate with trans people at all. That just isn't something that we see as real. We just do not align with that. And it's like, that's really scary. I mean, like, there might be people who believe that well intentionally, but I would say, like, as far as my views, obviously I disagree with you, and I'm going to advocate against you and say that whatever you believe should not be enacted in the law.
And the worst thing is this, like, because there's I feel a valid argument to say, like, transgender people have, like, a different set of rights necessary for them than the...
Sure.
We should be grouped together because that's historically, we've all been together, and historically we've all kind of built this movement together for LGBT.
I also see kind of a similarity in experience, like,
Yeah.
the way that I describe...
And coming out, and...
Yeah, I mean, like, the way that I describe, like, my experience with gender and, like, how it's not a choice for me is in the same way that I could talk to any cis person and be like, all right, you're straight, sleep with someone of the same sex. I mean, you can just choose it, right? It's a lifestyle choice. You're saying that it's a choice. Just choose to do that. Right. Why not? Do it. Find that person attractive.
Yeah,
If you're a guy, find like a male model. Just look online for male models. All right. If it's just a choice, then just choose to jack off to one of them. Like, if it's so easy, then just do it. You can't do it.
I'll be like, you've heard "Born This Way" by Lady Gaga. You supported gay people because of that. Trans people are the same exact thing. Born this way.
Yeah, and it's like, and so that's usually how I like to describe, in a like elevator pitch kind of way to an average person, why I am the way I am is because, like, yeah, you don't choose who you're attracted to, and you don't choose kind of how you feel about your body in relationship to sex. It's a little bit more complicated to talk about, but I feel like it is similar in that respect.
Right, but that's for me and you, relating our bodies to our sex. For some trans people, like, I'm totally fine with my body. I do not want to change my body. I have no qualms with the traits my biological sex at birth gave to me, but I'm not that gender.
Yeah, I mean, like I can see that there's going to be like variations of like people who have stronger or weaker feelings about that, similar to how you have people who are like asexual who don't have strong feelings about sexual attraction either way, but they might be like, you might be like asexual, but you might still be romantic, so you still have like romantic feelings for people. I don't know, like like there are variations with this. Again, these are things that are talked about in spectrums, not in strict like dichotomous categories. But I think that the relationship, like the starting point, is usually some relationship to sex or abstention, or in these kind of examples, abstention from.
Exactly. And I think another thing that stemmed a lot of this, though, was for me, I noticed in my real life, those were the statements where I said, listen, like my body developed one way, my brain, ever since I can remember, rejected that.
Sure.
And has created these immense feelings of discomfort, distress, just wrongness because of it. I have not been able to change that until I transitioned.
Sure.
So that resonates with people. That resonates with people who aren't trans. And then I started to think, well, this is how we get rights. This is how we convince people that we need medical access. This is how we convince people that we need insurance coverage, you know?
Yeah.
And so then I felt that these arguments where people were saying, well, you don't have to not identify with the sex you're born with and the body you're given. I felt that went against that. And that was really, at the time when I was so young, I really hated that. And I was really, really contentious online fighting against that in a way that went too far.
No, I definitely get that. And I will agree. I think it'd be better to have a conversation with a lawyer who specifically practices in this area, but I did take a course of sexuality and law when I was in law school, and there is a lot of legal basis, like a lot of the basis for how gay people have advocated for civil rights historically within the U.S. is on the basis of saying that this is just how we are. This is not simply a lifestyle choice, because if it is a lifestyle choice, then you can be able to discriminate against it. Like
tattooing.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, when I say that, you know, in the legal sense, discrimination means a lot of things. If you're a business owner and you have a sign that says no shirt, no shoes, no service on your door, that's fine. That is discriminating against people who have no shirts, no shoes, and like that is discrimination.
Yeah.
Or like laws which say that people under the age of 16 can't drive. That is discriminating against people who are under the age of 16. So there are laws in the US that allow discrimination. It's just that in order to discriminate against people, then you have to, depending on the kinds of people that you're discriminating against, whether it's something based on what they're doing or, you know, more specific here, based off of an immutable quality or characteristic, the latter, if you want to discriminate against people on the basis of something that they can't choose, there's a really high burden in the law to be able to do that, and it's almost never able to be done. So that's why a lot of times historically when lawyers have advocated for the rights of LGBT people, they've done so on the basis of this is just how LGBT people are.
Right.
You can't have laws that discriminate against them because they didn't choose this. This is just who they are. And also, who are they hurting? They're not hurting you. They're not going around like harming anybody. Like, why the fuck would we care to legislate against them to begin with?
Right,
you know?
exactly.
So I understand your frustration in that respect as well. But I want to get back. Sorry, so a couple of tangents. I want to get back to the initial point that like
ADHD.
it's but I want to get back to the initial point, which is that like it is a really dangerous thing to talk about like when you can tell someone that they are not a member of the community when they say that they are.
Yes.
And so I just want to acknowledge that. That said, that's going to be clipped out of context, and I know that's going to be.
I
see
know,
you fucking,
right?
you fucking Twitter clip chimps. All
People are
right.
gonna just watch the first 10 minutes. Kalvin hasn't changed.
I'm gonna say this, and everyone is going to agree with me. There is one obvious example that at least proves you can do this sometimes, and it's when you know for a fact that someone is lying.
Yes.
So the example that I like to talk about is like what's Steven Crowder? He's an example of someone who is overtly conservative and who has done several videos where he will like dress as a woman and act like a trans woman and will say that he's a woman and go into like gyms or bathrooms or what have you. And the whole point of the bit, right? The comedy, again, like I heavy quotations because I don't think it's funny. But the bit is that he doesn't actually believe that he's trans. We all know as the audience that he's lying, but he does it because he's trying to make some kind of clever point about like, oh, look, see, anyone can just identify as trans.
Right.
And be able to do X, Y, Z, whatever, right? But we understand as the audience that he's lying. And because of that, we know that even if he says that he's trans, even if he says he's a woman, we know that he's not, right? So there are at least some times where you can say to a person, no, you're not actually LGBT. But then that's kind of the easy example. figuring out beyond that point where to draw the line is super fucking hard.
And can you ever, though? You know, I'm not in their head. I'm not. So
yeah, I'm not going to like propose an answer to that
Right.
for this purpose. The point of that conversation, that background, is to let you as the audience know that this is a very complicated question that a lot of people have very strong feelings on, and a lot of people have given strong positions on it, and there's good reasons to show why they've been wrong in the past.
yes. And I was wrong in the past.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
So, and that's, you know, and I'm using that to say that right now, but like, I think that that's something that doesn't hit with a lot of people because like I've seen this happen so many times. And I think a lot of times the people who come to the wrong decisions on this are like people who have like bad intentioned beliefs. But I think that you're an example of someone where I think, especially with, given the context that you're talking about, that even if the way that you delivered it was bad, I do think that you said what you believed, you know?
Yeah, that was one thing is that I always...
It's not like you were trying to like, you know, appeal to a conservative audience or whatever. Like you were talking as a trans person about what you believed to be true at the time.
Yeah, and I shifted to YouTube over like any other platform because I was so passionate about like, I felt like the voice of a... I saw Blair White was out there.
Mm-hmm.
I, you know, admittedly watched her videos.
Okay.
But I didn't like that she was a conservative because I was not a conservative. I never have been a conservative. And so, you know, I would be like, there needs to be a person out there who's saying these things, but I'm not a conservative. I support every other social issue that you guys talk about. I believe in children transitioning. I believe in human rights. I believe in the importance of, you know, I believe in the importance of abortion, all these things. But just in this specific issue, I believe that these people are a hindrance to the, you know, I guess, goal of the trans community to be legitimized by the wider public.
Sure.
And so what I wish I had done, we can maybe talk more about this later, but is I wish I'd framed it that way. I wish it, instead of saying, you're not trans, you're not trans, you're not me, I would have said like, listen, like, I don't care if you're trans or not, this is a bad argument for trans people. Like, you shouldn't have said it this way. Like, you know, you can have your experience and everything, but we need to be careful about like the way that we portray the trans community, and the way that we portray like, or make statements that insinuate that it couldn't be an innate quality. Because we're in a time politically where trans people are actively fighting for our rights, for our legitimacy, and we can't afford to put out these you know, points and claims that can actually actively harm us, you know, actively harm our pursuit of rights.
Yeah, and I get that. I'm not sure if I mean, like, I'm sympathetic to that, I'll say. And the reason why, so something else, because going back to, you know, I want to keep watching the video where you're reacting to Brennan, but, you know, relating to, like, so coming back to the neopronouns thing, or, like, using the atypical pronouns, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think that ultimately, yes, gender is a spectrum, but there's some relationship, in my opinion, to sex for everyone who's talking about gender in an intrinsic quality kind of sense. And so I admittedly, personally, like, don't even know really how to think about or treat, how to treat, like, neopronouns or similar things. Like, because it doesn't really, there's, like, that aspect, and then also there's, like, God, I don't know how deep I want to get into this. There's, like, philosophy of language sort of issues.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's, like, you know, you're basically, do I want to talk about, like, Wittgenstein? Basically, there's,
Wittgenstein is good, though.
Yeah, I'll try to, like, so basically,
TLDR.
The TLDR is that basically there's an issue in the philosophy of language called when you have something called a private language. And private language is basically when you have a word, and the word might mean something to you.
Yeah.
But if not enough other people in society or in the space that you occupy also understands that word to mean the same thing as you, then you basically have a private language, or in other words, you have a word that essentially practically means nothing.
Exactly.
Anyway, so it's like basically philosophy of language, private language. So like if you use like neopronouns,
Right.
then there's the philosophical issue and then there's the practical issue. The philosophical issue is that you are using a pronoun that has no meaning to anyone else. So it basically is not a real word to other people. Like it would be the same thing if I went out in the public and I was like, I'm gobbledygook gender, right? It's like, no one knows what that means. I just made that word up. If I were to say that to other people, they're going to look at me like I'm a crazy person. And if you go out and you say, I use gender pronouns, then people are going to look at you like a crazy person.
You
or
ever
the
read
average
that
person
book
is
in
going
like
to.
elementary school called Frindle?
No.
It's a book about this kid that decides to start calling pens like Frindle or something.
Mm.
And I think it ends up blowing up at the end of the book and everyone's using it. But like, I think there's a whole part in the beginning of the book where it's like, it's like, why are you just giving a new name to something we already have a name for? And to me, it's like they, them is really encompassing of like.
Yeah, and like the nice thing, like with a philosophy of language sort of perspective, is that like everyone uses it and understands it to be like a not like a gender neutral pronoun.
And it's and people will say, you know, it's not grammatically correct, but it is. I mean,
it is.
I would always give the example of like, oh, it's dark at night. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You can't see what gender they are. You say they cut me off. You know, everybody uses that. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it's like I don't even really know how to be able to like address neopronouns, but like the strategy I've adopted, and I don't know if this is necessarily a great one, but basically like I just try to continue with my advocacy and make the points that I think are best to affirmatively make. And I would, to the extent that other people have criticized you for, especially based on what we've seen so far, like being very mean to Brennan in this video and being like digging at them personally, misgendering them, like, you know, there might be some people who say like, oh, well, they, them, if you use they, them, then that's misgendering. I don't necessarily agree with those criticisms, but using she, her, I think is
totally wrong, and I feel bad.
Yeah.
And I like wish, I mean, I did try to apologize to him like a few years later. I made a really bad apology video at one point, but that was, you know, different. But I sent him a personal apology from, I think, my personal Instagram account that I don't use, and the response I got just, I was like, okay, like, I felt like, I don't know. I was like, it's not your job to forgive me, so, but I apologized, and because I genuinely felt bad. I mean, even if I was 17 years old, like, if my words hurt you, if my words sent, you know, people to witch hunt you, like, that's awful. And unfortunately, I mean, I felt that myself, getting witch hunted by so many people online. So, you know, I hate that it took like something like that happening to me to really get to that point where I felt that bad. But, you know, I feel bad to this day about it. And I feel bad for anyone who's offended by these videos, because that was, you know, I wasn't mindful of it.
Yeah, no, and I get that. I think that the best thing to do with people in this kind of position, if you disagree with them, is just not really to engage.
Not engage.
Because there's a couple of reasons. First, I do think that a lot of people who use neopronouns tend to be like very young people, primarily on like, I don't know, like Tumblr or similar kinds of platforms, and call it what you want. But I feel like I've seen a lot of people who, I can't think of like a specific number off the top of my head, so people can be able to criticize me for not giving specific examples. But I feel like I've seen a lot of people who start out with those kind of pronouns, and as they get older and as they have to practically interact with other people in society, they end up, because of, you know, issues with private language, because you actually have to interact with other people on a day-to-day basis, and gender is a pretty common thing, especially terminology related to it, then they end up using something like she, her, they, them, he, him, because that's what people in society use nowadays. Maybe that will be different someday when society has progressed so much that we do have a lot more commonly used language around that, but that is not where we're at right now, and I don't think that's going to change, because again, I see gender as being fundamentally at its core related to sex.
Yes. Yeah, and like you were saying, again, this is something important to like point out with my current position, and really the position that Riley made to me that really put it into perspective for me of like where my arguments were flawed, was that like sex is on a bimodal distribution. So you have these peaks at like male and female, but then like a lot of like in between, like of intersex. And I feel that, you know, whatever mechanism it is or process that's going on like cognitively that's creating that incongruence, like it can fall anywhere on that bimodal spectrum.
Yeah.
Like, so some people, they might have like a non-binary brain, so.
Yeah, no, and I definitely.
So as to speak. I mean, there's, again, the pink-blue brain thing is.
Yeah, I don't like doing the pink-blue brain.
Everybody's brain is somewhere, like.
Yeah, it's somewhere on the line, but.
There's no real empirical evidence for that. And neuroscience is in its nascent stages, even, of, like, investigating this, but,
I mean, like, the main evidence, like, I'm going to appeal to inductive reasoning for how I come to the conclusion that being gender is an innate quality. I mean, like, there are some things that I would point to. I think there was like a statement by the World Health Organization or something similar. I'll flash it on the screen. I cited it in the report that I used for passing THEA, where they said that they see being trans and being LGBT in general not as a disorder or a mental health disease, but as an immutable characteristic. So I'll appeal to that. I'll appeal to, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we've had people try to themselves, make themselves not be LGBT, and it never works. That's pretty good inductive reasoning.
Yep.
So there's a bunch of different ways that I come to the conclusion, but then also there's personal experience. I went for 18 years trying to the best of my ability to be the ideal cis man. I was a fucking male model, captain of the football team. I was engaged to a great woman.
You were engaged?
I was.
That's insane. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
Riley's before and after is insane. It's like a dream MTF transition, I feel.
Thank you. But I mean, the point being, I literally did everything that I could to try and, be the ideal man, because I thought that if I could do that, then I would be happy, and I never was, right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously I don't want to make that the fundamental basis of my reasoning, because that's anecdotal and that's just my personal experience. In theory, everyone else could have a different experience than me, but I know at least for me individually, fundamentally, that I did not have a choice in being trans. So this is actually just who I am. And so I think that...
Same.
Yeah. I think that given what we hear from a lot of other people, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that there's enough other people who have said that they have the same kinds of experiences, that there is a good basis to believe that that's probably the case for most LGBT people.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we can proceed. Point being, you shouldn't have been mean here, but
Not
there is
at
a
all.
complicated underlying issue.
Yeah, I just want to say that this video is mean-spirited. There's no doubt about that, but let's just...
Yeah, we'll keep going.
We know that.
It looks like Brennan is pansexual and gender fluid, uses airs pronouns, but it doesn't really matter. So it looks like we're going to be calling you she, because it doesn't really matter. We'll point out for the record that with every single person I've met who is not a transgender and is actually trans, we do give a really big shit about what pronouns you call us, because if you called me a she in a public situation, people are going to be like, what the fuck are you fucking talking about? Because I don't look like a girl. Blair White doesn't look like a man. So the video we're going to be reacting to today is called My Gender Dysphoria.
So you were already at the time lobbing yourself in with Blair White.
Yeah. I was a fan of her.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't think that she was conservative. I wish she wasn't conservative,
I was going to say, how do you not know that she's conservative?
No, I
at the
knew.
time? I feel like she... Okay.
I knew, but back then I had less of a qualm, I think, with being friends with conservatives. Now, I don't know if I have any conservative friends.
I get
We can be cordial. But you know what, though?
It's complicated nowadays because the Republican Party has just become kind of fucking crazy.
Yes.
The people, the MAGA people are actually just kind of insane.
Back
So I mean,
then, Back then, Blair White was saying, after the 2016 election, she was saying, I'm never voting for Trump again, at one time, so.
All right, what happened to that?
The complete opposite. Hanging out with Alex Jones.
And how to cope with it. This video is a long time coming. This is my dysphoria and how I deal with it. So if you don't know, gender dysphoria is basically the mental illness that makes us trans people trans. Our brains experience gender dysphoria because in the womb, our brains developed as one gender and our body developed as another, which is
again, there's no empirical evidence for this claim. I was 17, I didn't know what a peer-reviewed article was.
Yeah, I mean, there was something else that you said in there. Sorry, I had a different thought about that. I can't remember off the top of my head, so we can keep going. It'll come back to me.
why through hormone therapy, social transition, surgery, we transition to the other gender in order to match up our...
Now I remember. Mental illness.
Mental illness. Well, gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
Yeah, it's... So, I mean, like, I'm going to say two things. That is true. At the same time, I do think that because there's... It's a little bit of a difficult thing, I think, to navigate, at least. Maybe it's like a rhetorical issue, because it's like there's so many people on the right who accuse LGBT people and trans people especially, just at a baseline of being mentally ill and using that as an opportunity to discredit their existence as LGBT people or the validity of them being LGBT. That I do think that, like, I don't know, like, yes, like, it's one of those things where you could be able to say it and it is true, but I think that there might be like I don't want to hamper on this too much because like I don't know, everyone does like rhetoric differently. It's more of a skill issue sort of deal, but like I do think that you have to be a little bit careful with that because there is a lot of people who are conservative who use the rhetoric of LGBT people are just mentally ill.
Yeah.
And when you say that kind of thing, it might indirectly end up feeding into that.
Yeah, and I think now I'd be more likely to say like all trans people experience gender incongruence. And this is a more neutral term, you know? Some trans people then, depending on their personal characteristics, individual differences, will go on to develop this mental disorder that's in the DSM-5, gender dysphoria, which is just clinically significant distress surrounding your gender, assigned gender at birth, assigned sex at birth. So not all trans people might have that, but you always have this experience of gender incongruence, which is what the ICD-11 writes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think it would make sense for the DSM. I almost don't want the DSM to shift to gender incongruence because gender incongruence doesn't have that negative connotation of a mental illness. It's just saying there is something innately going on causing these people to feel incongruent.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's where I'm at now with it, you know?
Our brains to our bodies because there's no way to fix your fucking brain, unfortunately. That's why I want to die.
But also, if they take gender dysphoria out of the DSM-5, therapists can't bill insurance for trans people anymore. That's an important part, too.
Yeah, and I mean, I hear that. I'm not saying that you don't need to have... I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing to have gender dysphoria labeled as a mental illness. I'd have to think more about whether or not I have really strong positions on that because like I could see an argument either way, but like, you know, the issue I have here more so is that like when I see people like you and I guess like Blair White at the time, I get people like you at the time and then Blair White and similar people who talk about gender dysphoria through that kind of lens. I just think that it's inadvertently feeding into these other kind of narratives that are also at the same time being peddled by people on the right.
Yes.
So like that's the main issue I have. Otherwise, you know, like as long as we're able to posit that better in the public sphere, then I don't think I'd have as much.
100%. And it's something I wouldn't really talk about in the public sphere anymore, you know?
Yeah.
I'm a lot more careful about what I say.
It looks like Brennan here is going to tell us about her dysphoria, and I'm pretty fucking excited to hear about it, especially with her cleavage out like that.
A lot of the hate comments I get, a lot of the unsupportive comments that I get are about these.
I already can't fucking do this shit, man. She was like, these, like...
So after reading some of these comments and getting a little bit frustrated, I did realize that, like, I haven't really talked about dysphoria. I haven't really talked about my dysphoria very much. So I think it's time to make this video and to talk about my boobs, talk about why and stuff.
No trans guy would say that. I want to say straight off the bat, I have never met a trans guy.
Pause.
Maybe.
Brennan wasn't identifying as a trans guy at the time, right?
Yeah, no, they were identifying as I was gender fluid at the time.
Okay, so what I'll say about that is at least based off of what Brennan represents so far in this video is that like I don't necessarily like, you know, the neopronoun is one thing. I don't have as much of an issue or any issue at this point with like having cleavage out. But like so far I'm not hearing like anything that's like raising major red flags. Well, at least in this point. Like you're judging Brennan on the standard of being a trans man when they haven't made that claim.
Right. Okay, it's more towards the end, I think, that there were some things.
Maybe I've seen some online, but 99% of trans guys would not reference their chest as their boobs. That's fucking weird.
Let's talk about my dysphoria. I hated my hair, and...
I hated my hair too, sister. Wanting a short haircut does not make you transgender.
I hated my boobs. I remember...
See where it's like these insults thrown in among things like wanting short hair doesn't make you transgender. You know?
Yeah,
wanting short hair doesn't make you have dysphoria if you can cut it off.
I mean, it's mean-spirited. They're personal insults. And then on top of that, it's like you're judging this person against a standard that they don't even say, that they're not even trying to hold themselves to, you know? Like, I think that, so does Brennan identify today as a trans man?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, and again, like, I think that if you made the video today, I would still have problems with it because, like, it would still be, like, mean-spirited.
Yes.
But, like, at the time, they're not even trying to present as a guy. They're trying to present as, like, you know, this more kind of, like, non-binary sort of deal, which is, like, you know, there's more flexibility. Like, if you want to do that sort of thing, like, you know, that's I don't know, like, it makes sense to me.
No, I agree with you now. I would have never, if I had, like, could go back, I would have just never made this video.
Sure.
You know, so.
Again, I just need to stop pausing this. I just need to let it go. But I don't know how long I can take this for.
Before I knew what dysphoria was, this was just me hating my boobs.
And I think another thing I want to say is that, like, if the video is centered around, like, dysphoria, chest dysphoria, maybe a better statement would have been, I don't know anybody that has chest dysphoria who would openly have their chest in the video. That's a better representation of, like, what I was thinking, I think, at the time.
For whatever.
I hate that fucking word, yo. Can we have a counter for how many times she says boobs in the comments down below?
In high school was when I started to learn what trans.
I can count maybe 15 girls in my school that all look like that, and Willow is the first one I think of. I will tell you guys though that if you want to know what like Willow looks like, very close
So
to
Willow
this.
was the one I did, like, that's not their real name, but they had treated. This is insane. When I was in high school, this person was like, she had, I don't know what pronouns they go by. I'll just go by they. They identified as I think a non-binary, like, just non-binary. And on the Trans Day of Visibility, or Remembrance or something, had tweeted, it was visibility, tweeted a trans woman's post. And this person's assigned female birth. A trans woman's post said, Happy Trans Visibility, Day of Visibility to all my fellow trans femmes out there. I was like...
Wait, retweet, like, you know, is it like...
It was a quote tweet.
Is a quote tweet?
And Happy Trans Day of Visibility to all.
This person
is
said,
AFAB. And I quote tweeted it in high school, and I said, congratulations on your transition from female to female.
So, like...
It was someone at my school.
A complicating factor of this is that young people, generally, not exclusive to trans people, but in this case also including trans people, young people are cringe. Young people will do cringe things and want to get attention and be acknowledged, and there's weird interactions when you mix that with the trans community or like the LGBT community online. Like, yeah, that's cringe. Like, what do you want me to say? But like, you know, do I think it's worth like, you know, like ostracizing this person socially or whatever? Like, no, I don't know. I just don't really care.
Oh, they weren't ostracized. They were like in my friend group, you know. But
Gotcha.
like that caused a rift a little bit in the friend group.
Yeah, it's just like I don't know. Like
more people were mad at me.
I think that here's like the enlightened position. I think I've come around to when you're in your teenage years, and then also I will apply this then to trans people for the first couple of years they begin transition. You're allowed to have like 1 to 2, maybe 3 years max of being cringe. Yeah. You're allowed a period of being cringe and experimenting and doing weird shit because you're going through a big change or whatever. You're finding yourself. You're figuring out who you are and what's going on with your body and all that. Like I will give you a grace period where I'm not going to care a lot about what you do for that period because you're experimenting. You're finding out. Right. But after that, you gotta wisen up a little bit, all right? Like, I'm gonna, at least with my friends, I'm not gonna use like random people online, but if I have like a friend of mine who I know could be able to take like a criticism and like they ask me like, hey, like, what do you think of this XYZ thing I'm doing with like, you know, maybe they're trying on like some new clothes or whatever. I'll give them my honest opinion. And if it's not good, then I'm gonna tell them, you know? Like, because I want them to look good. And
I should have just been more empathetic to that first point about like just letting people experiment early on.
I think that's like the biggest thing here is that like it seems like at the time Brennan was like relatively early on with experimenting with their gender. They definitely, I mean, like we know nowadays that he ended up settling more or less in the kind of field as like man, or in the male gender role. So yeah, like obviously they experimented for a while, and like that isn't something that should be punished. It's a weird thing when you have young early transition trans people online talking about their experience or like giving advice because like, and this is just something I think that the average person has to learn. I'm sorry, don't take advice from early transition trans people. They don't know what they're talking about. They're still figuring it out just at the same time as you are, all right?
But it's weird because for me at least I like knew so quick. I mean I had a cringe phase like before I came out where I was on Tumblr, but like I knew like the day I came out as trans, I knew that I was like binary trans guy. I went to my mom and said, I'm trans, and I would like to go to gender therapy. I want to be on hormones.
Sure, and
I
mean,
said it
get
every
that.
day.
Like, I knew I was a woman for literally as long as I can remember. But like, when I came out and like, I've been, God, I started taking estrogen in 2018. That's like 7 years ago at this point, right? And it took a long time after I started doing that to kind of settle into the kind of person that I am today.
Yes.
Right, and so I think that, and there's a lot of, experience and a lot of like trying something and messing up and then figuring out. Like, there's just a lot of trial and error that comes from that, that you early on are not gonna have figured out. And that's okay. You don't have to have everything figured out, but also if you're early on, then you probably aren't in the best position to like give advice to other people because you're still figuring it out. And then if you're still figuring it out, don't take advice from people who are still figuring it out. Please, it's just the blind leading the blind.
Yes.
And I understand sometimes that can be hard because like if you're a later in transition trans person, then honestly, from what I've seen, a lot of people who are like later transition, they just kind of go on with their life and don't really think about being trans anymore.
Yeah.
So they don't go out to give a lot of advice. So I understand that sometimes it may practically be hard, but like, if you do decide to take advice from earlier transition trans people, grain of salt. All right. If that's the best that you have access to at the time, if you're like, I don't know, maybe you're watching a stream or whatever.
I'm sorry if you had to watch Kalvin Garrah videos.
But, grain of salt, heavy grain of salt. All right, because they're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
And Brennan seems to still be figuring it out here, so I don't think that the cruelty is warranted.
Exactly.
Imagine like blondish hair rather than the crazy pink. That's basically what Willow looks like.
There was a term for it, and I had a reason to hate my boobs. It's because they don't fit the body.
Yo, so you're gonna go on and on about how much you hate your breasts, and they're just out. Yeah.
I always wore sports bras. I never got a real bra.
Oh my god, that's definitely a trender pose. Like if you see someone who goes like this, they're definitely a transgender.
And I
literally
remember
was like doing
putting
that the whole
on
video.
2 sports bras one
It's
day,
not-
and then 3,
I mean, yeah,
and 4.
I'll defer to what I said
and
earlier,
I
it's
would go
not
to school
good.
with like 4 sports bras, and I remember looking in the mirror and just thinking, that's still not flat enough. It's still not flat enough. And I hate it. And so much of my hatred went towards my boobs and my hair, but then when I was able, it was a lot easier.
I don't even know why I'm laughing. Like I'm honestly laughing because this is so ridiculous, and I just know that this person is not trans, so it's making me laugh.
Like again, just bad. I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Again, going back to what we were saying earlier, because like that is a really, like, you do not, like, let me put it this way. You never want to be the person to say that someone is not trans and be wrong.
Yes.
You never want to fucking be that person.
Never.
All right?
Never.
And you were kind of that person
I
here.
was totally that person, 100%.
Yeah.
So long. I can't believe I went to school like this every day. Almost every day I went to school with at least 3. And this is 3, and I can't. I can't breathe. And this wasn't...
I'm getting triggered. Like honestly, this is like I know
getting
you guys
triggered?
like honestly people always
think
get
you
me
were
like
getting
please
You
have
know
your
what? I think I was a little triggered because I was so close to top surgery. And I felt like there's a part in the video. We'll get ready here.
I know. I'm just teasing you a little bit, given like the context of the
Given
kind of
how
content.
mean I was,
Yeah.
right? Exactly. So I think it's a little ironic.
triggered, like that really is a mental health term. Like this is actually triggering my dysphoria because I see like how ridiculous this is, and like it's literally triggering my personal dysphoria because this is literally mockery of real trans people.
When MTV happened, and if for those of you that don't know, I was on an episode of True Life, and it was about being genderqueer, and because of True Life,
She
Yeah,
was
that's
on
when
TV
MTV was a thing.
for millions of Americans to watch and look and be like, that's what those trans people are like. That's why Republicans fucking hate us. And not all Republicans. I know there's actually tons of my dad is Republican. He literally...
Not anymore.
Pause.
Can I give a shout out to my dad? He got radicalized by Donald Trump. He's actually a socialist now.
Awesome.
Anyways.
I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry for people whenever it fades out or whatever. But I'll try to keep an eye on the monitor. But your dad was what, radicalized to be a socialist by Donald
Yeah,
Trump?
he was. He's actually a socialist now. And I think by me being trans, I mean,
Oh, sure.
He was so supportive since the very first day.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is so accepting of me. But this is why right-wing conservatives don't fucking like us, because they see this bullshit and they're like, what the fuck? Because to be honest with you, like, if I wasn't me, I would be looking at this and be like, what the fuck?
My binder came in the mail when the cameras were there. I put it on, and there's just one moment where I was in the bathroom. I remember just thinking, like, it's still not flat enough. And then I kind of thought, it's not gonna be flat enough. I kind of came to a conclusion then that I was gonna have to be okay with these. I was gonna have to find...
That's not how that works. Let me put this in this perspective for you. When I first got a binder, obviously I put it on, and I was pretty flatter than I normally was. I would usually wear baggy hoodies over hoodies over hoodies. I would layer sports bras on top of my chest to make me as flat as possible, to the point I couldn't fucking breathe. And I watched shit like this, alright? She says, oh, it wasn't flat enough, it wasn't flat enough. Yeah, no shit, it's not gonna be flat enough because there's still fucking piles of fat on your chest. She goes, it will never be flat enough, so I have to be okay with it. There's a thing called surgery, but you know why Brennan here doesn't want to get surgery? Because it's...
Because I have a thought on this. So, like, basically, Brennan here, I'm trying to understand their argument as they're representing it in this video. Basically is that, like, well, they tried to do everything they could be able to hide it, but they were really big, so ultimately they just kind of had to come to terms with it, and then ultimately, like, I don't know, we haven't gotten to there in the video, but I assume they're going to say that, like, well, I had to just kind of, like, come to terms with it, and then I've learned to, like this part of my body more.
Yeah.
And I assume, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you're going to be saying, like, no, like, that's not how dysphoria works. Like, you know, if I did, like, if I was in their position, I would do everything in my power to be able to hide it, even if it, like, ended up causing me some degree of harm, because, like, dysphoria can be so bad and so crippling that, like, you know, I wouldn't, like, there's no circumstance where I would suddenly come around and suddenly be fine with having breasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that, like, I don't know, like, again, the context of the video, if they're trying to not necessarily represent themselves as a transgender man, but rather as non-binary, then, like, I can, like, kind of understand. I will say that from my own perspective, that I probably am going to be, that I probably came from a perspective similar to yours, where it's like, there would never be something. Like, if there's like some aspect of me that's masculine, that no matter what that's like overtly male, right? That like something that, like, you know, if it's seen on me that, like, it is going to tell people dispositively that they should clock me as trans,
right,
then that would always bother me.
Right.
And I still have some issues. Like, for example, sometimes, like, my voice still gives me a little bit of dysphoria. Granted, I've gotten better over time, and I mean, nowadays, literally, I'm in court a lot. Last week, I was in court, like, 3 days out of the week, and I had to argue in front of a bunch of different people. And nobody, I mean, maybe it's the case that, like, all of your average people who are coming into court are, like, secretly, you know, gendering me correctly and, you know, treating me nice out of the kindness of their heart. But you deal with a lot of mean people in district court, all right? And I don't think that everyone is that kind-hearted.
Yeah, no.
So, you know, I've gotten better. I've learned to kind of temper my feelings about that over time. But that's because I can rationalize to myself, like, oh, it isn't clocking me to other people.
Yeah, exactly.
But, like,
that's the type of thing that I'm okay. Like, height for me too.
Sure.
For, like, you're tall. I'm pretty. Sure, I'm not, but. Also, like, I know cis women that are your height, and then I also know cis men who are my height. Mm-hmm. So that I rationalize to myself. Yeah. And I've been okay with it because of that. Did you want to finish this video, or?
Let's just, because, I mean, we're looking at the time that we're at. We're, like, over an hour in.
Yeah, we are.
So, but the point, let me just ask you, to have it on the record.
Yes.
Are there any other videos that you made that were meaner than this one?
I don't think so. In my heart of hearts, I don't think. This was the one that was criticized the most harshly. Got me canceled in the end. Mm-hmm. And there were other ones that were mean-spirited. You know, I was still acting mean-spirited. But as I got older, because this was one of my first videos, you know, I was 17 years old. As I got older, there's one video where I reacted to somebody that identified as, like, autism gender, and I was pretty harsh in that one. There was a lot of criticism around the fact that they were a part-time wheelchair user, and I had called them Gypsy Rose, which is a very ignorant take, because but at the time, and I've explained this online, the context has been lost to me, deleting all of the content off my channel, but I didn't understand that there were a lot of part-time wheelchair users. And then, unfortunately, the Illness Faker subreddit got a hold of that video. I didn't have any part in this, but they got a hold of that video and they tried to get that person's disability benefits taken away. Which when I found out about, was like, I vehemently disagree with the idea to do that because I believe in reaping government benefits. So I always have. So that was, but I apologize for that. I would never, first of all, participate in that. And number two, I would never have said that if I was more keenly aware of, like, the prevalence of part-time wheelchair users.
Okay. I think, well, I don't think that we have to review the other ones in that case, or the other videos in that case. I wanted to use that as a vehicle to be able to get onto the record what your views were at the time. We've already talked about that pretty decently. I think that we've defined, like, what it mean, like, what you meant when you were referring to people as, like, SJWs or transgenders, or what transmedicalism meant.
Right.
I think that we pretty thoroughly talked through that. For the remainder of the video, I think that we had it on the record, or we were talking about it, but basically my understanding of the remainder of the video with Brennan is that Brennan was going to argue, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that because they couldn't do anything to be able to hide their chests, they, in their own mind, had to kind of just learn to accept their own body, and then therefore, because they just learned to accept their own body, that they started presenting with more cleavage, basically.
Yeah, and
Which I got.
I mean, and also, like, I say this, I was wrong in the video to say that Brennan wasn't trans, because they do identify as male now. They got top surgery. But I also look back and I'm like, I mean, so you, the claim that you could just not have chest dysphoria by being okay with it, even Brennan knows now isn't the case. And so, that's what I was most bothered by, was that claim that you can just kind of do something or convince yourself of something and the dysphoria is gone, because it's not,
I mean, yeah, I hear that. I don't know if I said this while we were still recording earlier, but, like, I can be sympathetic to the idea that if there's something about me that would make me clockable to any other person as trans, that would make me, no matter what, if there was nothing I could do to be able to hide it,
right,
that would make me uncomfortable, period.
Yes.
And there's nothing that I could do to make myself not uncomfortable with it. So I wouldn't be able to relate to what Brennan represented in that video, so I understand where you're coming from in that sense. But I do, I think that this ties into the issue that I raised earlier, that a lot of early transition trans people are figuring themselves out and don't know where they're going to end up, or how they should feel about their body in a lot of respects necessarily. And so, I don't necessarily fault Brennan in the way that you do for some of the things that they say, because even if I disagree with them, it's like, okay, you're in that 3-year period. I'm going to give you a pass. You can say things that are wrong. You're still figuring it out.
I don't fault Brennan either. I do think Brennan had been identifying as trans for longer than that, though.
Okay.
At the time. They were 20 at the time. Yeah. But, no, I also, even with that, like, I don't fault Brennan for this video, like, that they made about their experience, his experience, like, at the time. And it was wrong of me to try and, make a joke out of somebody who was being vulnerable online. Like, I shouldn't have done that, and I would never do that now.
Okay, and I think that we can be able to move on, because I want to use that as I want to talk then, so we have a pretty good idea, I think, of what your views were at the time.
Yes.
Now I want to shift into what caused you to change some of your views. And obviously, some of this has to do with, well, from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about that?
So I started to get a lot of criticism from people, and including Brennan, around the time I met you.
Okay.
And I, at the time, really wanted to be a lawyer. So I saw you were in law school, in the same state as me, and making these videos. And you were like, and I also was getting into BreadTube, so I was watching, like, Vosh, Destiny at the time, And I was seeing these people who were, just like me, they were, not conservatives, lots of people really far left, lots of people, even center left, but in that left space, who were like not afraid to argue with each other, like about small issues, but like more broadly really agreed with each other on about like everybody deserves the right to not be discriminated against for innate qualities. Like
Sure.
everybody deserves the right to, like, just left-leaning ideas about like human rights. And I liked that. So that really drew me to that community, and everybody was really articulate and really good. So debating, and I was into that. So I started, so what happened is Brennan made like 8 videos about me a few years later. And I was like, okay, clearly a lot of people are disagreeing with me. That's what I thought.
To put it lightly.
Yeah, yes. And at the time, you know, I had shifted, like, and also at the time I was also making other content too. Just like other transition-related videos and videos with my friends. So it wasn't always all just that, these reaction videos. There was a lot of other things too. But I was like, okay. I thought to myself, like, if so many people disagree with me, I'm obviously in this echo chamber of my audience, who are all really counting on me to agree with this.
Sure.
So I need to stop making YouTube videos. If I ever want to reevaluate my position in like an honest way, I need to get off.
That's really interesting. So there was a point where you kind of acknowledged that, like, if you wanted to change your views,
I had to leave.
because your audience expected you to have a certain kind of view.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why I stopped making videos.
I mean, honestly, like, so what I'll say first is I really appreciate that, because I think that shows that you do fundamentally care about
Being intellectually honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think that there are a lot of other, like, I can think of so many other creators who have made similar kinds of claims, like, oh, if I'm shown X, Y, Z, or if ABC happens, then I'll 100% change my views. And they never do.
Yeah.
Right? Things will happen. But, like, people, at the end of the day, I think a lot of content creators online, especially people who make political content, not everyone, but a lot of people, care primarily about appealing to what they think that their audience wants over being intellectually honest.
Of course, and I was worried I was doing that. So I also at this point was in the position where like I had really focused on school at this point. You know, I'm halfway through my undergrad making videos, but I knew at some point when I go to grad school, law school, whatever I end up doing, that this YouTube thing can't be how it is. You know,
Sure.
So I already knew I was going to leave. But it was a couple years before I would have, and I was just like, you know what, like, I need to get off of here. So I leave, made a terrible apology video. But I was also, like, at the height of, like, being just totally witch hunted, and I was going through a lot, like, with my best friend Ryan, who, you know, I love him, and we've rekindled, but, like, he really hurt me badly at this time, because he just jumped ship, and even if he was making the same videos as me, jumped ship, and, like, just without ever reevaluating his position, suddenly believed all these new things without, you know, taking any time to think about it. And then, yeah, I don't know. I'm not him, and we have rekindled since. But I just, like, felt really betrayed by him, and I just left, and I focused on school, and I really met you, got closer with you around that time, and that's when you and I, like, was really talking. You would just kind of, like, I would watch your videos, and you would say things where I'm like, you know what, you are saying what I wish I could have said, because the whole bimodal sex thing, and how that relates, like, you know, being trans most likely, and, like, still not, you never denied the fact that there was, like, probably an innate quality that makes people trans, and those are the things I cared most about. So it was like, okay, there's this other person saying these things, but also, like, being really empathetic to people I don't understand. I need to be more like that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and you, like, I don't know, you, like, coached me through, like, a lot of, like, these arguments and, like, logical conclusions, and I, like, just, like, learned a lot from you at that time. Because you were also willing to talk to me about it, you know? That's the thing, a lot of these people, like, I would ask them to talk and explain what they meant to me, and it's just, you know...
Yeah. No, I mean, like, that's a really big issue that I've experienced online that I've seen other people go through, is that, like, a big issue that we have is that, like, I guess there's kind of 2 issues I can see off the bat. First, there's like a presumption that a lot of people, especially on the right, but we also see this on the left, act in bad faith. And no matter what you say to them, that there's nothing that you can say to them that will ever make them change their minds. Think about like where most Republicans at the federal legislature are at this point, and even at now a lot of times at the state legislatures. Like, they constantly harp on trans issues. I don't think that there is literally anything that anyone can be able to say to them to get them to change their minds on those things. Like, they say it because it's popular among Republican voters. It gets them a lot of donations to their campaigns. Like, they don't, I don't think that any of them really principally actually care about the things that they're talking about, but they say them because they're popular among their voters. So there's like an issue, and there's a similar issue among like online conservatives who make political content, because similarly, like, you know, kind of like as you described, they understand what their audience wants them to say, and they have a heavy financial incentive to not say things that their audience, that most of their audience would disagree with them on.
Yeah.
And that means that they can't actually risk changing their minds, because if they do, then they're going to stop growing. I think another really good example is Hunter Avallone, where he's someone who used to be a really big conservative content creator, had a massive following online, and then he went through a very public changing his minds, and now he argues a lot of very progressive issues, and he, I believe, is very active online, but I don't think you can ignore the fact that he hasn't really grown as much online. I will say I think he's grown a lot on TikTok. I think he's been successful in there, but I don't think his YouTube has grown nearly as much as it had when he used to make conservative content.
Yeah.
So there is a real incentive against changing your mind and against engaging with people. So that's the first thing I'll acknowledge. And then the second thing is that when you have someone who you're disagreeing with, online people, especially in the debate space, they want drama. They want blood sports. They want, like, I think that a lot of people who watch, even if they won't admit it, like when they see their favorite debate streamer or whatever talking to someone who they disagree with, then they want to see that person like intellectually torn to shreds.
Yes.
And I think that like some of this I can understand a little bit with trans people. Like if you're an online trans person and you're constantly inundated with, oh, this conservative content creator said this shitty thing, and this conservative Republican legislator said this thing, and it's like this and this over and over and over, then yeah, like you might want a little bit of blood. Like I can sympathize with that a little bit. I used to be of a similar mentality, but I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's healthy, because if you do that and you're going into a conversation with somebody who disagrees with you, then at best you're going to have a bloodbath, and then neither person is going to change their minds. You might have some more views, cool, but at the end of the day, like no one has been convinced, or very few people, maybe some viewers. And at worst, you're just going to be mean to each other, to another person for an hour on stream. And it might not go over well for you. You might not look good coming out of that. But you're certainly not going to make any friends. And so, I don't know, so I'm glad that, like, you know, a big focus I had for a long time when I was doing a lot of that streaming content was to try and have those kind of conversations. And so I'm really happy that we were able to have those kind of conversations. But I will acknowledge what you're saying, that, like, there is a big fear if you had a position that you felt very strongly about and you're open to, like, talking through some of the nuance and even changing your mind, like, it's scary, because you might think like there's a pretty good likelihood if you talk to someone on stream that they're just going to use the opportunity to rip into you and send you on a witch hunt.
It's like interesting because now I'm in this position, like as a grad student, like studying, like I want to go on the record and say that like I'm a counseling psychology grad student, but I do not want to be a gender therapist. I think if people heard Kalvin wanted to be a gender therapist, there might be a little bit of an uproar.
Yeah, they're going to try it. Yeah, I hear you.
If I were to be a clinical psychologist, eventually get my PhD, like it would be working with in forensic settings and stuff. I'm interested in that. But what I really want is to do social psychology, and I do social psychology research now, nonverbal communication, like not really related to this gender stuff, but as a result of being so like thrown into that field and like being really active, like I mean, I was at the SPSP conference last year, social psychology, and like I went to a trans symposium, and I looked on Twitter after, and people like knew I was there, and like were tweeting kind of like harsh, the scary things. It was kind of scary. Like, and so I was like, dang, like, so even, like, as of last year, like, people are seeing me out in public, like, me trying to go to, like, a research symposium that supports trans people, and it's, like, they don't like that I'm there, and it makes me kind of feel sad, because I'm, like, I I actively like really have made attempts to like try and really understand like these nuanced issues in the trans community and trans discourse on binary people, like the research and everything, and try to like build up these points to support that community and kind of make some sort of reparation for what I've done in the past to hurt it, you know, like. We include non-binary people in our research, and I'm like really, really like adamant with my PI about like the way that we need to include like ways for people to express their, you know, gender identity, and like the like non-binary is not just, there's like a huge umbrella of non-binary, and how you can't just write like this is the way it needs to be worded, and it's just social psych research really needs to take that approach, or we make to get the best results possible, like really give people the option to self-identify of like what they are. And I don't know, I try to, and also work in public policy research, and my job is in public policy research. You know, trans people are affected by policy, and you know that well enough, but yeah, I really just want to leverage like science and the ability to be involved in making policy to like better LGBT people's lives, and my videos weren't doing that, you know? So that's why I'm like, I have no interest in making videos, because what real world impact was I making? Nothing good. Nothing good. Maybe those videos where I actually documented my transition, did that, you know, tea videos, top surgery videos, advice for like trans parents for their kids, but like, point blank period, the reaction videos to individuals were wrong, morally wrong, like, and I just shouldn't have done it. Like, I shouldn't have come after individuals, because we were saying this off camera. It's just that, like, if you go out and witch hunt like an individual person, like, you're gonna start weeding out people who are willing to share their experience and their voice. And we don't want to live in a world where people feel afraid to put out their experience as a trans person or a queer person or anything.
Yeah.
So I do regret that a lot.
Well, let me ask you, actually that's a good pivot, because there's two things I want to ask you about, and you can answer these questions, I guess, in whatever order you see fit. I want to learn how this all has affected you personally in your life, and then I want to have a discussion on the record of, you know, based on your previous views and kind of how your views have evolved, what you still agree with and what you disagree with today, and then what you're sorry about.
Yeah, well, it's affected me, I guess, personally, like, when I hear things from people saying on specialty videos about me on TikTok, where like people say that like I made them scared to come out, or I made them like, you know, ashamed of being non-binary, and I feel very bad, and I'll comment on those videos. I'll be like, I'm sorry, you know, for my personal account. Maybe not everyone knows it's me, because it's like, it doesn't say Kalvin Garrah. It says my like TikTok username, my account that's like kind of low key, but I'll just be like, yeah, like I'm just sorry. I never meant to make anybody feel that way, and I hate that I made you feel that way. I am like, it worries me, because like, you know, I did take all my videos down, which is something that people wanted me to do, so I did. I do worry some context has been lost. Sometimes that I apologized have been lost. So it's just kind of like, I guess, the price to pay for like, you know, doing what people thought was right. And so I try to like just grapple with that on my own. Like, people are going to think about me what they want. The most I can do is just like do it, something like this with you, and just be honest about how I feel, and just like if people in real life see it, like just kind of be candid with them about like, hey, that's just not who I am. And I've never really had too many, like, I'll meet new people, like if I'm dating, whatever, meet new people, I give them a disclaimer about it, and I'm like, I'll answer any questions you have, you can go look it up, like, and nobody's ever had a problem in that regard, because it's then like, goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning. It's like, you meet this person, like, I know that I'm a kind person in terms of my interactions from day to day with people. I try to be a good person. I try to like do right. I try to be an advocate. I try to like be involved in social justice. And so I think people see that, and I guess it probably holds more weight than like the things I was saying when I was, you know, 17, 18, 19, which I'm very grateful for. And I hope other people online can see it that way. And I also encourage anybody, like, I mean, my email, I think, is still on my YouTube, and if you ever, like, really want questions, or, like, I'm not sure if a lot of people would write anything in, but you're welcome to send me a message, because I'm really not going to fight with people anymore, you know, I'm just willing to apologize to people. And And then what was the other question? It was
So it was first like, what are, so I guess like the, first like how has this affected you personally, like this whole experience with social media, and then like secondly, what are the things that you still agree with, what are things that you disagree with, and what are things that you apologize for?
Yeah, I guess my like feelings intrinsically went from like shame, which I find different from guilt. Shame in terms of like, oh, like, but I was really self-centered. And then guilt was like, oh, I actually feel bad about this. Then it went to like kind of embarrassment where I'm just like, that was so dumb. Like, what, why would I make these like, just like, what was I doing? You know, like I was not even really incentivized like by much. Like I just wanted to like, I don't know, I guess I wanted to share my opinion and everything, but like at what expense?
Sure.
Now I'm kind of come to the place of just like getting over that embarrassment of it, I guess. What I agree with now, that being, I think that it's extremely, maybe not extremely, but there's the potential for arguments that can insinuate or explicitly disagree with the point that there's an innate quality to being trans. I think that can do real harm. I think the trans community is at more danger than ever politically. The reputation of the trans community is very poor right now. The new administration coming in is very scary for trans people. And this is a time when the need to like balance everybody supporting everybody needs to also align with like making sure we are intentional about the arguments we make to preserve the rights of the people who are most at danger. So to me, trans people who are like people who need the access to resources like therapy, surgery, and other things of that nature are the most in harm's way. Because, and I hate to say it like this, but being misgendered is harmful, but it's not as harmful as someone's right to medically transitioning being taken away. Should we let people misgender us? No. No, not at all. But like with the neopronoun stuff, it's like, as someone who's working in policy too now, I'm like, am I going to weigh, fighting tooth and nail for neopronouns in the face of conservatives, like, as more important than fighting tooth and nail for, like, medically transitioning and having that be accessible to even kids and stuff like that? Hell no, I'm sorry. I'll stand on that point, but I will never look at a person that uses neopronouns ever again and refuse to use their pronouns. That was my error in the past. Like, I think that if someone identifies as trans, like, it's not my job or really my business to be saying you're not, Because how can I ever really know? How do I not know you're using non-binary as a stepping stone? You're going to transition one day. How do I not know? Those are my big things. Mostly just preserving the rights of the people who are, suffering the most. But I also have tried to just take a step back from all that because I have my niche in research and social psych, and it's not trans stuff. So, I just try to like, I don't know how to. I'm still thinking through it too.
Sure.
in terms of just like what I want to be in terms of a trans advocate. I try to be visible for those who can't be as well. Like at my school, I'll out myself in classes and stuff and share my experience. Like if other people haven't, because I know there's trans people who are closeted in my program. And I guess the last part, sorry, I forgot again. I'm getting off on a tangent.
What are you sorry about?
What am I sorry about? Yeah, and I think I touched on this. I'm just sorry for hurting people because I feel like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I said something that was like rational, valid, whatever to a lot of people. Like if someone got hurt by it, like I just hate that and I feel really bad. And I like, especially because it's strangers, it's people I can't ever like apologize. There are people out there who I will never meet who I hurt and I can't apologize to them ever. So that sucks and that really, really makes me sad. So I do feel sorry for, and I also feel sorry for making people invalidated. I feel really fucking sorry for people that ever watched my videos and felt scared, more scared to come out. because that was never my, my intention. I feel bad for people who felt pressured to conform to, like, binary ideas of, like, gender and stuff. Because, like, I've, come out of my... And also, maybe that was some internalized, like, stuff, because I was really hyper-masculine at the time. I was, like one thing with my sexuality, like, I was always very, oh, I'm straight, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But I'm, like, now I'm, like, very comfortable being bisexual, like, all this stuff, so... and maybe transitioning was a big part of that, realizing that, like, I could just, like, be a top and also be a guy, but that's a whole thing. But, like, the part of it of being, like, I understand, like, the way that, like, maybe non-straight, non-cis passing, like, trans people felt like my videos gave them a reason to feel ashamed of, like, not conforming. Like, I feel very sorry about that, because everybody deserves the right to self-expression, especially. So, those are a few. There's probably more things I'm just, like, kind of hard to think about in the moment. But I've spent a lot of time reflecting. Like I said, being off the internet, all you have time to do is reflect. So, just a lot. And I'm sorry to Brennan, because I know that he was, I keep using they because I didn't want to call him she in the video. So, like, him. I feel sorry to him. But that's because he actually made a long video talking about how he was feeling. And yeah, I mean, I could go on for a while, but those are probably the main things.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I think a lot of people appreciate that. I'll caveat and say that, I expect that there might be people who are still unsatisfied. That's not my place to judge.
I can't be like, I also can't expect everyone to forgive it,
Yeah.
I've come to terms with that.
But, I hope that some people will at least appreciate that.
Like, you don't have to forgive me to, like, be, at least know that I am sorry.
Yeah. And I appreciate, for my part, I wasn't necessarily someone who was as affected by it, but, I appreciate they're willing to say that. It shows a lot about your character.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for, any flack you got for being friends, like, with me at that time,
And I'll take a lot from my friends. All right. I have a couple there's a couple of things that I will take any amount of shit for, and one of them is I will always take shit from my friends.
Yes.
All right. The one thing, so I have one thought I'll offer as far as wisdom from my experience doing legislative advocacy and policy advocacy. So I do think that one issue that we run into online, going back to what you said about, like the importance of, the representation of the trans community for civil rights purposes. I do, like a couple of years ago, I'm not sure if I would have agreed as much with the idea that the image of the trans community is as important for purposes of advocacy. I think that nowadays, given that we have seen a very significant surge of anti-trans and anti-LGBT legislation in a number of states, that it is more important nowadays because now it is a lot, there's a lot more at stake.
Yeah.
And the representation of the trans community might not be like the thing by itself that kills us, but it does make it harder to do advocacy.
Oh, yeah.
And on that point, one big thing of wisdom, because this is a problem that I see online, especially among a lot of like very hardline left-leaning or progressive content creators or influencers or what have you, and sometimes advocates who I will disagree with, is that there are a lot of people who have basically the position of, it's not my position to convince you. Yeah. Basically like, if you are someone and you have a position that is not as popular or mainstream or socially acceptable, then you don't see it as your burden to convince other people to agree with you. That you see it as actually the burden is on them to learn and come to where you're at. That, there's like a saying that's like, it's not my job to educate you.
I hate that.
I also hate it.
Yeah.
I will tell you right now, I 100% hate it. And the reason I hate it...
It shouldn't have to be, but it kind of unfortunately is.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, I agree that, like, it sucks, but at the end of the day, like, we live in a democracy. The way that you actually change laws, like, if you want to be able to go into a legislature and you want to be able to pass a piece of legislation, then you need to get 50 plus 1% of the people in that legislature to agree with you. And there's a really good likelihood, especially if you're advocating for a minority population, that not everyone is going to be on your side right off the bat. So you're going to need to convince some people who are not already predisposed to agree with you. And that means making sure that what you are selling, what you are advocating for, is understandable and accessible to the average person, to the average reasonable person.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in like a super red state where the average person in your legislature in your state is like fucking unreasonable, that they're acting in bad faith, that nothing that you say to them will ever convince them, then sure, fuck those people. All right, I'm not talking about those people. But I am fortunate enough that I work in a state like Maryland where we have a supermajority Democratic legislature. Now, that does not mean, when I say supermajority Democratic, it does not mean supermajority hardline progressive. There are a lot of moderate Democrats in that legislature who you need to convince, and I have needed to convince, to agree with me, who are not already predisposed to, in order to be able to pass this kind of policy. All right? In order to do that, I have to understand how to be able to shape what I say in such a way that makes what we say, mind you, this doesn't mean that we're diluting down what we're saying to like accompany them, but the more radical of an idea that we are trying to propose, the more different from what the average person understands, then that's a lot more work on us. The stakes are higher for us. Now, I don't mind meeting that burden, but just understand that that's what that means. That if you want to advocate for something more radical, let's take it out of trans policy. Let's say that you're someone who's like, I want universal health care. That's pretty radical, but there are a lot of other countries that have it. It's not outside the realm of possibility, but it's going to be really freaking hard to do if you're approaching that from the perspective of, oh, well, anyone who disagrees with me, well, that's on them. Because at the end of the day, if you're going up to a representative or a senator or whatever, and you tell them that, you say like, well, it's your job to agree with me. They're going to tell you, well, stick it where the sun shines. I don't got to agree with you. You know,
No,
like
exactly.
and then they're going to vote the same way that they were previously. So you're not actually making a difference in that case. So just like, you know, as far as what you're describing, as far as like the rhetoric that we use and the perception of the community, like, I don't want to like go around and police people's representation. I'm not saying to do that, but understand that since we live in a democracy, there is a degree of importance with how we represent our ideas to people who are not predisposed to agree with us. Not everyone already is going to agree with you. And just because someone doesn't agree with you, that doesn't mean that they're evil. That's just how most people are.
And a lot of times, notice how like there's a lot of people who have been anti-trans that people would look like, you're evil. You know, a lot of trans people. Hunter Avalon, he's someone. People probably looked at him and said, you're evil. And look at how he is now. And what it took was someone like, wasn't it Vaj?
I think so at the time.
Who really
I don't like giving him credit because I don't like him. But yeah, I think that was what happened.
Well, listen, DGG for life. But
amazing.
Listen, but Vaj changed Hunter Avalon's mind on at least some things that paved the way for other things. And Hunter Avalon's a huge supporter of trans people now. Yeah. And publicly. So it sometimes does take educating people on something about your identity, which is fucking hard. But education is the key to knowledge and the key to the advancement of society, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. Related to that, I'm not sure if I want to talk to you about policy specifically. Usually I ask people about like specific areas of policy that they're interested in. I know you do some policy work, but I feel like it's more appropriate because we've tried a lot of ground. All right, this is an interview that's going on longer than most of the other ones I have. So I think I'll put a footnote in that unless there. Well, let me just ask you, I guess. Like, is there a particular area of policy that you're working on now that you feel really passionate about?
You know, not yet. Not in my job right now. I really care about the state of Maryland. So just anything that betters the state of Maryland in general is interesting to me. Like right now we're in the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. I can't say that much about the project, but like that's what I'm working on at the moment. I have fun with that. But again, my public policy position is like a GA fellowship position.
Well, let me ask you that. All right, then maybe the question is like, well, people know about like what you did when you were on the internet. I don't think a lot of people know what you're doing now and going forward. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm currently a graduate student. I'm getting my master's in counseling psychology. Okay. I kind of have two roads. So the reason though I'm at the school I'm at, I stayed there, was just because like I'm kind of the lab manager of a social psych research lab. Okay. I just got published as a first author in a journal the peer-reviewed journal, Current Psychology.
All right. You got published as the first author in a peer-reviewed journal?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you ever done this gesture with your hand over your heart?
I mean, I'm not sure in the context that you're describing. I mean,
Maybe
in
think
general.
it's sincerity or honesty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we study that. It's called the heartfelt gesture. But also laughter. That's a big area of like interest to me. Laughter research. Like I'm gonna be a speaker at the SPSP conference in Denver. Speaking on like research on that. Yeah, so I mean, realistically, I'm hoping to get onto a social psych PhD and eventually teach and do research. That's kind of my main goal in nonverbal communication, but I'm also interested in like legal stuff. So nonverbal communication a lot, like body language and deception, cues to deception. A ton of that is pseudoscience. A ton of it. And then if I went the other route of clinical psych, I'd be interested in working with like the prison population, being expert witness, forensic psychology, like stuff like that. So really big psych. I used to really want to be a lawyer, and
It's hard, all right? Let me tell you, being a trial attorney is fucking hard.
I'm sure.
No,
No,
I'm not gonna talk about it here. Maybe I'll stream talking about a game or while I'm gaming sometime. But like, yeah, if you did not, the fact that you chose not to become an attorney, like that, will not bear negatively on you.
I did it because I decided to go into psych like research and stuff because I found that I was a lot more fulfilled by the idea of like teaching. Like this summer I'm like co-teaching like, or maybe like a TA, but like a little more than a TA because I'm developing the curriculum a little bit. Psychology of cults and conspiracy theories.
Oh, all right.
So that's gonna be really fun. It's a new course they're gonna offer. I taught some undergrads last summer in like a crash course and a bunch of research stuff. And I don't know, I just really enjoy statistics. I really enjoy like actually like doing every step of the way of experiments and social psych. And so I'm not entirely sure exactly what my like doctoral research will be in because I'm kind of like just waiting until I'm applying to more places again, but that's kind of what I'm doing. But also, like, being in the counseling psych program while I'm, like, a social psych researcher has really, like, been good for me because, I mean, being in the counseling program has taught me, like, a lot about, like, just radical empathy and, like, accepting people how they are and, like, knowing how to, like, talk to people and listen and just, it's really been good for me, so.
That's great.
Yeah. I'm really enjoying it. I'm glad I went the route I did. But, yeah, that's kind of all I'm doing now.
All right. Do you plan on doing anything else with social media in the future?
Probably not, honestly. I've thought about making, like, a psych podcast, but I would wait until I was farther into my, like, career.
Okay. But you don't think that you're going to be doing any more, like, YouTube videos or...
No, because it just feels like... What am I have to say? I mean, what am I going to go on? I don't want to talk about being trans on there.
Yeah.
And also, it's just like, I don't know, being a therapist, because I will be licensed to be a therapist, so I don't want to, like, be on social media in that capacity, like, with clients, even if I'm working at, like, the, DOC with inmates. Still, the licensing board can be a little, not a fan of that, but... I don't know. Yeah, I have a lot of interests, but I like public policy. There's public policy, social psych research labs, so I'm kind of just seeing what I end up doing and what I like, and but it'd definitely be psych related and probably social psych related.
Gotcha. I am sorry that ultimately you aren't able to do anything more social media because I mean like I think that all of us start doing this or do this because it's really enjoyable and fulfilling.
I loved video making.
It
was my passion as a kid, so.
Yeah, so I mean, I see it, but I also understand where you're coming from. That like, with the landscape how it is, with your history how it is, and with like your audience developed as it is, right? Like, it's really hard, as we kind of talked about earlier, to be able to go from making political content or content talking about certain issues with a certain set of beliefs, and then shifting when that's kind of what the audience that you developed really comes to expect. So, I mean, I understand that perspective. I understand the perspective that it's just really hard to be able to interact with people in the online political space from where you're at currently. So I mean, I get that. I just see it as like, I don't know if it's like too much to say that like it feels like a bit of a tragedy. To me, it feels like it. I understand that people might like roll their eyes or whatever, but like it is sad when you have like ultimately someone who I think that you are a good person.
Thank you.
I think that
I try.
and I think that the reason I say that is because it takes a good person to be able to look at their past and when they have done wrong and to be able to own that and acknowledge that and to be able to apologize and make right. I think it takes a big person to be able to do that, and then especially to be able to change your views accordingly. I think that reflects a very mature and fundamentally good kind of person that unfortunately with like the way that social media is, it doesn't really give a lot of space for.
Yeah. I don't know. Those are the things I try to be is like a morally good person. I try to be like a good friend, good partner, like good Samaritan. I try to be supportive of people. And, you know, my YouTube videos weren't really conducive to that.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I also like this. I don't want this to be a reflection of my character because everybody who knows me these days, like, they'll find out on my YouTube, they're like, you were like this? And I was like, yeah, I don't know why. Because even at the time, I mean, I wasn't like that in real life. It was just kind of being caught up at such a young age in the exciting, like, contentious chaos of YouTube and the debate sphere and the just, you know, LGBT discourse. So,
yeah. Well, I guess, you know, for me, the last really big outstanding question is like, what's the wisdom that you have? You know, you have a lot more experience with social media as a trans person than most people. You know, you've gone through all of this that you've described to us today. Like, what's the wisdom that you have for other creators, especially other trans creators, but maybe other creators in general, who want to be able to create political content or content talking about trans issues or LGBT issues? Like, what's your wisdom?
don't become besties with people who are YouTubers and they have nothing else going for them in their lives because they will jump ship from you. Seriously, it's people who haven't gone to college, who don't have a job. Like, I quit YouTube, I just went and got a job. Like, I just went and got a regular old job. I didn't care. Yeah, those people will jump ship from you. Number two, always be intellectually honest and real about your opinions because, you know, I can't imagine imagine being like a grifter. Like, can you imagine the cognitive dissonance all the time? Being a grifter is really cringe. Don't do that. I just know a lot of them. And also be like willing to always listen to what everybody has to say about your content, even the negative, because there's always some truth to it or feelings involved, and people's feelings matter a lot. Like, and you know, sometimes it's really easy when you're interested in politics and discourse to get caught up in like what's objectively true. But people's feelings matter a lot, especially when it comes to topics where like feelings and identities are so entwined in the things we're talking about. And like every person that watches your video is a real person that sat at their computer or phone or tablet or anything and they watched your video and they felt some way about it. And it could have hurt them even if it was just for a day. And that person felt worse because of your video. And I hate that I made people feel that way.
I appreciate that. I will say one area where I might disagree a little bit is like, because I hear you with like, for people who disagree with you, like try to listen to and understand where they're coming from, because even if they're coming from a place of like bad intentions, that there might be like a degree of truth to what they're saying, or like,
oh, well, if they're being transphobic towards you, like,
if they're being I would just say that like, you know, don't, you know, at least in my opinion, you can do what you want, you know, theoretical viewer, but like, you know, if there's like a bunch of people who are making mean videos about you and like there might be like some good stuff that like there might be some degree of truth in there, like try to understand the criticisms to the best that you can, to the extent that it would help you to be able to grow and develop.
right.
But I wouldn't say like subject yourself to watching a bunch of like hate content about you, because like
I don't
that
do
could put
that.
you in a really bad mental space.
Be willing to listen to other perspectives. It's probably better.
Yeah.
Or like be able to discern between constructive criticism and just unfounded hate.
Last question.
Okay, last question.
So given what you, again, like kind of given your experience with social media and given how you've seen it be used,
Yeah.
how do you think that social media could be used to make a positive impact in IRL policy or politics? Or what are the different ways that you think it could be best used?
I think to gather people for building a community of people who kind of have the same focus of enacting that change. Like I've seen like huge, even like in where we live, the city we live, like communities get built like on social media to come out and do like real like events or like you know, for example, even like when you invited me to testify against that anti-trans sports bill, like, you know.
Next, Kalvin Garrah, please, for 2 minutes.
My name is Kalvin Garrah, and I'm here today to testify against House Bill 757. As a transgender man and as someone who's played on various men's lacrosse teams, I can't stress enough how counterproductive I believe this bill is. If House Bill 757 passed, people who look like me would be forced to play on women's sports teams. Most people I meet tell me they've never met a trans guy and are surprised when they find out I was assigned female at birth. This is because a lot of trans people blend into society without anyone around them knowing they're trans. At 18, I started playing lacrosse and joined a local men's recreation team. When I got to the first game, I noticed that there were cis men on the team who were shorter than me, less muscular than me, and in general, less physically fit than I was. The longer I played on the team, the more I realized that despite being trans, I was just as physically capable as my teammates. As I got better and better at lacrosse, I joined more teams and even ended up playing on a club team for my college. Never once did I feel like I was at a physical disadvantage due to being trans. In fact, I never even told any of my teammates or coaches that I was trans. Forcing young trans boys to play on women's sports teams would discourage them from even trying a sport in the first place. This is because being on a women's team would make any trans guy feel uncomfortable, out of place, and dysphoric. House Bill 757 claims that it wants to save women's sports, but if passed, it would force men like me to compete with women. A trans man on HRT has just as much testosterone in his body as the typical cis man does. Testosterone allows men to progress just as fast as cis men in the gym. In fact, many trans men who take up weightlifting go on to compete against and beat cis male competitors in weightlifting competitions. If trans men are already playing on men's sports teams and performing just as well or sometimes better than their cis male competitors, imagine the unfair advantage they would have competing on a women's team or in a women's league. At a surface level, HB 757 may seem like it will instill fairness in sports, but in reality, this bill will do more harm than good and has the potential to make sports even more unfair.
You can build out your community on social media, within even your university social media can be used for like a university to create, like we have a Young Democratic Socialists of America group at my university that has like a online thing, you know, and so I think that, and then like I think utilizing like to portray, to be thoughtful and mindful about the way you say things. And then, like, I think of Natalie as a really good example because her videos are so artistic and aesthetic that they have their appeal of just that. But then the political undertones are brought into people who maybe just clicked on it because they thought it looked cool.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I like that she does that. I think that's really, 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 really beautiful.
So, like, being able to use, like, let's say, like, aesthetics or like certain things that can appeal to a wider audience to be able to bring in the average person.
I think
and then
she's
being able
really
to
done that.
Gotcha.
Controversies really done that. So that's something I think. And then, yeah, video essays are great. I think video essays are the future of, have been the future of YouTube.
The one thing I don't like, so like there's a couple of things I don't love about video essays. I do think that they're good overall. The things I don't love about them are that there's a lot of variation in quality. You know, I think a lot of people who are your average viewers don't know how to be able to evaluate the rigor and the credibility of the people who are making your average video essay. And so, like, you can have someone watching, like, I'm not going to name specific creators, but, like, there's some video, not every video essayist is created the same.
Maybe I am good with, like,
but I'm fine with making certain recommendations. I think that ContraPoints is wonderful because I think that she puts in an incredible amount of rigor and thought into what she says. And I think that comes through, right? So I think that like it can be done really well. But that's the first issue I have. And then the second thing is that, like, I don't love that with video essays, it's a snapshot of where someone's at on a particular moment at a moment in time. You know, it's not like that video essay is going to be updated if their opinions change or if there's like new information that comes out.
Yeah. Well, I follow this one guy, and he's I don't know if he's an evolutionary psychologist, social psychologist. I don't like evolutionary psychologists, but he makes TikToks where in every video, when he makes a claim, source at the bottom. It's a real quick blip on the screen, but he he's really, really great, but he talks about like things that are perpetuated a lot in like like pop psychology circles, like relationship science, and like, you know, human dating and like the evolutionary stuff. It's all, I hate a lot of evolutionary psychology. I'll go on the record and say now I hate evolutionary psychologists a lot. But this guy, I like him. His name's Mackin Murphy, I think. He makes these TikToks though where he always has a source. And if you can make videos that are backed up by evidence, and you can get that across in a way that is accessible to the layperson, then that's great, because it really promotes information literacy. And information literacy has been the death, I think, of like the right.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, like that. I still cannot get over like the idea of like, yeah, let's make a major part of the Republican platform to get rid of the federal Department of Education.
Yes.
Like it's just like
Trans kids are having surgeries. They're going to school and coming home.
They're going home and they're getting these awful. I can't remember what he fucking said.
You're a parent and your son leaves the house and you say, Jimmy, I love you so much. Go have a good day in school. And your son comes back with a brutal operation. Can you even imagine this?
I can't believe he said that at a fucking rally and that was taken. And that
seriously?
Yeah, it's like fucking crazy. Then there was the line. I don't know. There's just been like a bunch of different shit.
Yes.
Like, the current Republican Party does admittedly make me like a little bit doomer, because like I don't know how literate a lot of the average voter in that party is. I'm sorry to say that. I don't want to be the person to be like, Republicans are all kind of stupid, but like, bro, don't be the party to advocate for getting rid of the Department of Education. Don't be the people who are constantly attacking like public education. Like, it's just so fucking...
It feels like they're doing that as like, it's almost like a secret like little way to keep people who support right-wing policies and stuff, to keep them not literate in information.
I've thought about this before. I don't want to like...
We could get down the rabbit hole.
So like, it is a little bit of conspiratizing, but like, I think that there is a degree of truth to the idea that like the Republican Party at the federal level, like when we're talking about the actual policies that they advocate for, they are very effective at advocating for policies that strictly only benefit incredibly wealthy people.
Of course.
Like massively incredibly wealthy people. People who the average Republican voter will never be.
Yeah.
They might try to fool themselves in thinking that, but like they will never benefit from the vast majority of Republican policies.
Of course.
So I do think that there is a lot of stuff that the National Republican Party does to try and distract. This was something that came from a really nice point that the previous person, Delegate Ashanti Martinez, mentioned, that like there's a lot of stuff that they will do to try and distract and obfuscate from the actual policies that they do, so that their average voter doesn't like completely turn against them, because because like that party is not actually advocating for policies that benefits their average voter.
I think particularly at the local level, state houses are going to be the front line of defense against a Washington who is really focused on stripping away rights and just bringing us back to a time where, you know, white men were supreme. And that's ultimately what you see in a lot of the rhetoric, a lot of the policy around immigration, a lot of the policy around, you know, just the LGBTQ and trans issues. I mean, they're literally trying to sensationalize anyone on the margins to basically hide the fact that they are going to pass another tax cut for corporations. Trump just talked about it this week at the stock exchange.
Oh, really? I hadn't heard about that.
He talked about lowering the tax rate to 15%. You know, before he lowered the tax rate to, I think it's like at 20-something% now, it was 30. And so he's lowering it to 15%. And so that's what they want to distract us from.
Yeah.
You know, even this week when he did his Time Man of the Year
I did
interview,
hear about that.
You know, he was asked, how are you going to lower prices? This was a commitment of your campaign. He said, look, when they get high, it's hard to lower them.
Yep.
I don't know how to do it. It's hard.
Right about that.
That is the fallacy, right? Is that they had all these answers, but the reality is...
Or they said they had all of
them. Of
course,
but that's the lie, right?
Right.
Is that they have these answers and that they have the solutions, but in reality, they're distracting from what their ultimate goal is, and that's to make the wealthier wealthier, and to make all of us have to serve those individuals, whether it's through working longer hours and having no labor protections, whether it's not having real pathways to the middle class because we're limiting the types of economies that we have, whether it's bringing down regulations and so that our communities and neighborhoods are destroyed by pollution and just corporate greed because no one really cares. It's a time for us, I think, right now to really just build community amongst the people we love so that we can protect each other under these next 4 years.
So, you know, like it would make sense that they would advocate against education policy so that they keep their voters stupid, so that they don't realize that. But like, I don't know. Like that's, I never love kind of like leaning super heavy into that kind of stuff because like that is the realm of conspiracy theories and like, I don't know. I will say that it does not make sense why they would try to get rid of the fucking Department of Education. It does not make sense why they would constantly be harping on trying to like dampen down or make worse education policy.
Yeah.
Like why they're trying to do that does not make sense unless you put it in that kind of context. Then I feel like it makes some things click together. So anyway.
Yeah.
So the Republican Party makes me kind of doomer, but I'm in Maryland and they do not have
safe
power
here.
here. Yeah. So
Pretty
I
safe.
will hold on to that. All right. Well, I think that's all that I got. Kalvin, do you have any last words or wisdom or anything for the audience?
No, I think I said everything I could think of.
All right. Well, in that case, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it. You know, this is a very, obviously, like a sensitive conversation. A lot of the stuff that we talk about is like very important to people. Obviously, I don't know how to do this kind of thing perfectly, but I think this is a conversation that was worthwhile and worth having. So thank you for agreeing to do this.
Yeah.
Boom.
Thank you all for watching.
Mm-hmm. And subscriber, whatever. I don't know.
Subscribe to Riley, not me. Not a YouTuber anymore.
I don't do this for money. It's whatever. I do it because it's fun and fulfilling. And it's cool. All right. Bye. Like, you know, you might say that, fuck this fly. I'm sorry, brief intermission. 1 second, I gotta kill this fucking fly.
Brief intermission of Riley to kill this fly.
Like, fucking, you mother,
That turtle is so cute. I love that.
where'd you go, motherfucker? Where'd it go? It was just up here. Hit it.
Riley's the girlfriend for her and Pixie that kills the bugs.
Well, now I do, because I'm angry. I don't want them in my fucking house. All right?